Play something for us, janitor. Twinkle, twinkle, perhaps. The words sliced through the grand hall of the Manhattan Center for the Arts like a blade finding soft tissue. 300 guests in silk and diamonds turned as one, their champagne glasses catching the light from crystal chandeliers overhead. Malcolm Reed stood at the edge of the stage, silver hair perfectly combed, Italian leather shoes reflecting the polished floor beneath him. His smile carried the practiced cruelty of a man who'd spent 30 years deciding whose dreams deserved to live. James Cooper stood alone under the spotlight's glare, his maintenance uniform hanging loose on a frame that had grown thin from too many skipped meals and double shifts. The mop bucket at his feet gleamed with industrial cleaner, its handle worn smooth from his calloused grip. Behind him, the Steinway Model D sat like a sleeping giant, its black lacquer surface holding the distorted reflection of a man who'd learned to disappear. In the shadows near the service entrance, Lily Cooper pressed her sketchbook against her chest until the spiral binding dug into her ribs. 9 years old, blonde hair escaping from a braid her father had attempted that morning, oversized hoodie swallowing her small frame. Her eyes fixed on her father with an expression no child should have to wear. The terrified recognition that the world was about to hurt someone she loved, and she was powerless to stop it. The laughter built slowly, rippling through the crowd like a wave gathering strength. A woman in a gown that cost more than Jamie's annual salary covered her mouth with manicured fingers. A man in a tuxedo whispered something to his companion, their shared amusement evident in the twist of their lips. Malcolm lifted his champagne glass higher, conducting the symphony of mockery with subtle movements of his wrist. 3 hours earlier, the grand hall had been empty except for the whisper of Jamie's cloth against the piano's surface. He'd arrived before sunrise, as he always did, because early mornings offered a kind of invisibility. The maintenance staff moved through the building like ghosts, present but unseen. Their work erased the moment it was completed. The cleaning satisfied something in him, the transformation of disorder into order, the evidence of effort that lasted until the first guest arrived and undid it all. The Steinway gleamed under his attention. 12,000 moving parts, a soundboard cut from Sitka spruce that had grown slowly in high altitudes, each ring recording years of patient accumulation. 17 layers of hard rock maple bent into the rim, a feat of craftsmanship that took human hands and inhuman pressure. The keys themselves had once been ivory, now replaced with composite polymer that mimicked the weight and texture of elephant tusks without the moral burden. Jamie knew these details the way a former lover knows the geography of someone else's body, intimately, painfully, against his will. His fingers traced the curve where the lid met the case, gentle enough that he left no prints on the finish. The piano deserved this tenderness, deserved someone who understood what it cost to be beautiful. "You're talking to furniture again, Dad." Lily emerged from behind the stage curtain, her presence announced only by the soft scuff of worn sneakers against wood. She moved like someone who'd learned to take up minimal space, to announce herself only after confirming it was safe. The sketchbook never left her hands during waking hours. Jamie had tried once to peek at its contents, and she'd clutched it to her chest with such fierce protectiveness that he'd never asked again. "That's not furniture, sweetheart. That's a cathedral with 88 steps to heaven." She tilted her head, studying him with the unnerving directness of children who saw too much. "You always say weird stuff about pianos. That's because pianos understand weird people like me." Her giggle surprised them both, a sound that still felt like a minor miracle, 10 years after the night she'd entered the world and taken her mother with her. The guilt lived in Jamie's chest like a second heart, pumping shame through his veins instead of blood. Sarah had known the risks. The doctors had outlined them with clinical precision, numbers and percentages that meant everything and nothing. She'd chosen to continue anyway, chosen Lily over herself, and Jamie had spent 9 years trying to forgive her for leaving and hating himself for resenting the choice. "You're not supposed to be here." His voice carried no real authority. Lily had learned early that her father's threats were paper tigers, all show and no teeth. "Mrs. Patterson said I could wait in the hallway, but the hallway was boring." She dropped cross-legged onto the stage floor, just beyond where the spotlight would reach. "Besides, I wanted to draw you with the piano. You look different when you touch it." The words landed with more weight than she'd intended. Jamie felt something shift behind his ribs, the careful architecture he'd built to protect himself developing a hairline crack. Different how? Like you're remembering something important. She opened her sketchbook, pencil already moving across the page. Something you forgot to forget. The silence stretched between them, father and daughter separated by more than the 12 feet of stage. Jamie turned back to the piano, his reflection ghosting across its surface. 42 years old, though he looked older in certain lights. The kind of face that hard work and harder losses carved into premature lines. Eyes that had witnessed too much and revealed too little. He'd perfected the art of being present while absent, there but not there, occupying space without claiming it. Mr. Cooper. The voice cut through his meditation like steel through silk. Jamie straightened, tucking the cloth into his pocket with practiced efficiency. The woman approaching wore a dark blazer over gray slacks, her posture suggesting someone who'd spent decades learning to project authority without raising her voice. She carried a clipboard pressed against her chest like defensive armor. Could you please finish quickly? Miss Sterling will be arriving soon, and everything needs to look immaculate. Yes, ma'am. She paused, her gaze traveling from his face to the piano and back again. Something flickered in her expression. Confusion, maybe, or the uncomfortable recognition that she was addressing a human being rather than a function. You've been polishing that piano for 20 minutes. It deserves the attention. The woman's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Whatever response she had been formulating died before reaching her lips. She turned on her heel and strode toward the back of the hall, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. Jamie watched her go. 9 years of this, 9 years of being spoken to in that particular tone. Not quite rude, but carrying the presumption that his time belonged to everyone except himself. 9 years of swallowing responses that would cost him his job, his daughter's health insurance, the fragile stability they'd built from the wreckage of before. Dad, yeah, sweetheart, why do people always talk to you like that? He crossed to where she sat, kneeling until they were eye level. The position hurt his knees, but he ignored it. Some conversations required proximity, required the ability to look into someone's eyes and confirm you were being heard. Like what? Like you're not really there. The observation carried a weight far beyond her years. Jamie reached out, ruffled her hair with a gentleness that contradicted his rough palms. Some people only see uniforms, Emma. They don't see the person wearing them. But you're a person. I know that. You know that. That's enough. Is it, though? The question hung between them, unanswerable and essential. Before Jamie could attempt a response, the grand doors at the far end of the hall burst open. Voices flooded the space, staff calling instructions to one another, heels clicking against marble floors, the rustle of expensive fabric being adjusted and readjusted. The transformation team had arrived, ready to convert the grand hall from an empty room into something worthy of Manhattan's elite. Jamie gathered his supplies with the efficiency of long practice. Stay close and stay quiet. I'm always quiet, I know. That's what worries me sometimes. They retreated into the shadows as the hall filled with organized chaos. Workers unfurled tablecloths with the snap of sails catching wind. Someone tested the microphone, their amplified breath filling the space like a giant's exhalation. Lily settled into her corner near the service entrance, sketchbook open, pencil already moving. Jamie watched her for a moment, the small person who'd inherited her mother's insight along with her features, then turned his attention to the room. Catherine Sterling entered the grand hall exactly 47 minutes before the scheduled start time. She'd built a career on arriving early, not out of eagerness, but control. The final 15 minutes before any event dissolved into chaos, and Kate had eliminated chaos from her life with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to underperforming board members. She paused just inside the entrance, scanning the space with eyes that had evaluated 1,000 galas, 1,000 grant proposals, 1,000 moments where someone attempted to take something from her. The Steinway sat center stage, its surface catching and reflecting the warm glow of stage lights. Perfect, the sight of it sent something sharp through her chest, a sensation she'd learned to ignore through decades of practice. Miss Sterling. Her assistant materialized at her elbow with the suddenness of someone who'd learned to anticipate her employer's needs. The seating charts have been adjusted per your request. Mr. Reed is at table 3. Good. Keep him away from the bar until after the speeches. And the Peterson donation? Confirmed this morning. 400,000. Kate nodded, already moving toward the stage. Her heels made no sound against the floor. Years of practice had taught her to walk without announcing herself. People revealed themselves when they thought no one was watching, said things they wouldn't say if they knew someone with power was listening. The skill had served her well in boardrooms and galas alike. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage with the grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime performing. The piano waited for her, patient and implacable. Her fingers hovered over the fallboard, not quite touching. 24 years. 24 years since she'd allowed herself this particular form of weakness. She could still feel the weight of the keys beneath her hands, still hear her mother's voice cutting through her practice sessions with surgical precision. Winning isn't about playing better, Victoria. It's about playing so they don't question your worth. Kate pulled her hand back as if the piano had burned her. She hadn't touched one since the night of the Chopin competition. The night she'd made 3 mistakes in the final movement of Moonlight Sonata. 3 notes out of thousands. Insignificant to everyone except her mother, whose silence had lasted 3 weeks and communicated more than any lecture could have. Movement in the wings caught her attention. Someone in a maintenance uniform stood in the shadows watching her. Their eyes met for half a second, his dark and unreadable, hers carefully neutral. He looked away first, but something in his gaze stayed with her. Recognition, though she couldn't imagine why. Maintenance staff were invisible by design, present but not present, there but not there. Miss Sterling, her assistant again, persistent as morning. The quartet wants to confirm their set list. Tell them to stick to the program. No improvisation. Kate turned away from the piano without looking back. But the feeling followed her through the next hour, the sensation that something important had just happened, something she'd almost understood before it slipped away like water through cupped hands. The gala filled slowly, then all at once. 300 guests poured into the grand hall in waves of perfume and cologne, their voices rising in practice enthusiasm. Women wore gowns that cost more than Jamie earned in a year, the fabric draped and structured to suggest effortless elegance that had required 3 fittings in a team of tailors. Men adjusted their tuxedos with the confidence of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged in formal wear. Jamie worked the edges of the room, a ghost among the living. He collected abandoned champagne glasses before anyone could trip over them, straightened chairs that didn't need straightening, ensured the pathway to the restrooms remained clear. Lily had returned to her corner, her presence so unobtrusive that guests walked past without registering her existence. She'd mastered her father's art of invisibility, and Jamie couldn't decide whether to be proud or heartbroken. Quite the circus, isn't it? The voice came from Jamie's left, cultured and amused. Malcolm Reed stood beside him, late 50s with silver hair that suggested distinguished rather than old. His tuxedo fit like it had been grown on his body rather than sewn, and his shoes probably cost more than Jamie's monthly rent. Everything about him communicated easy confidence, the kind that came from never having to doubt your place in the world. Just doing my job, sir. Of course you are. Malcolm's smile didn't reach his eyes. The help always is. He walked away before Jamie could respond. Not that Jamie would have. Men like Malcolm didn't want responses from people like Jamie. They wanted audiences, wanted the satisfaction of knowing their observations landed, wanted the small daily confirmations that the hierarchy held firm. The evening progressed according to the printed program. Speeches were delivered from the stage, each one carefully crafted to inspire generosity while requiring minimal actual thought. Donations were announced to thunderous applause, the amounts large enough to impress without requiring the donors to sacrifice anything meaningful. A string quartet played Vivaldi with technical precision and zero emotional investment, and the older guests nodded approvingly because that's what one did when confronted with classical music. Kate took the stage to introduce the Foundation's newest initiatives. Her remarks flowed with the polished ease of someone who'd given variations of the same speech 100 times. The transformative power of music education, the importance of supporting young artists, the Foundation's commitment to making the arts accessible to all. She believed every word she said, which made the performance more effective. People could smell insincerity at 50 paces, but genuine conviction sold itself. Jamie watched from the shadows, his hands busy with a tray of empty glasses. Something about Kate's posture felt familiar. Not the confidence, which was clearly practiced, but something underneath, something guarded. She held herself like someone who'd learned that relaxation was a luxury she couldn't afford. Dad. Lily appeared at his elbow, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. What is it, sweetheart? That man is staring at you. Jamie followed her gaze. Malcolm stood near the orchestra pit, champagne glass balanced in one hand, watching them with an expression Jamie had learned to recognize. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to curiosity mixed with contempt. The look of someone who'd spotted an anomaly and intended to investigate. Don't worry about him. He looks mean. Some people are mean, Emma. That's just how it is. But why? Jamie knelt to her level, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. Because they're scared of something. Mean people usually are. What's he scared of? Before Jamie could formulate an answer that wouldn't terrify his 9-year-old daughter, Malcolm's voice cut across the room like a knife through silk. Well, if it isn't Beethoven with a mop. Scattered laughter rippled through the nearby guests. A few heads turned. Malcolm had pitched his voice to carry without seeming to shout, a skill that came from years of holding court at similar events. Jamie straightened slowly, feeling every eye in the immediate vicinity fix on him like pins through butterfly wings. Malcolm approached with exaggerated casualness, playing to the crowd that had begun to gather. I've been watching you all evening, Janitor. The way you keep looking at that piano like it owes you something. Jamie said nothing. His hands tightened around the tray of glasses, knuckles whitening with the pressure. Lily gripped his sleeve with small fingers that trembled. Tell me. Malcolm's voice rose, ensuring everyone within 30 feet could hear. Do you even know what that instrument is? Or do you just enjoy touching expensive things? The laughter spread like fire catching dry wood. Nervous energy rippled through the assembled guests. The primal satisfaction of watching someone else get humiliated. The relief of knowing it wasn't them. Malcolm had given them a show, and they were grateful for the entertainment. It's okay, sweetheart. Jamie's whisper was barely audible. It's okay, come now. Malcolm gestured broadly, his movements theatrical. Enlighten us. What makes this particular piano so special to a man who cleans toilets for a living? The room went quiet with the kind of silence that preceded violence or revelation. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on Jamie. He could feel Lily trembling beside him, could feel the weight of every guest's attention pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Walk away, he told himself. Just walk away. That's what invisible men do. But something else rose inside him, something older than caution, deeper than fear. He'd spent 9 years erasing himself, 9 years playing it safe, 9 years teaching his daughter through his actions that people like them didn't fight back. The weight of those years pressed against his chest until breathing felt like work. He met Malcolm's eyes and let the words come. It's a Steinway Model D, 9 feet long, 12,000 moving parts. The soundboard is Sitka spruce, grown slow and high for resonance. The rim is 17 layers of hard rock maple, bent into shape under heat and pressure. The keys were originally ivory, now composite polymer to mimic the weight and response. He paused, letting the silence build. It costs more than your Mercedes, and it holds more stories than your column ever will. The room stopped breathing. Malcolm's smirk faltered like a candle flame in wind. For one perfect moment, the mask slipped and Jamie saw what was underneath. Not anger, not wounded pride, but fear. The fear of a man who'd just been seen, truly seen, by someone he'd intended to humiliate. Jamie gathered his bucket and cloth with hands that had started shaking. If you'll excuse me, sir, I have work to do. He took Lily's hand and walked toward the service exit. Behind him, the whispers began, the rustle of judgments being recalibrated, of people unsure whether they'd just witnessed something important or merely awkward. At the door, Lily tugged his sleeve. Dad, yeah, sweetheart, that was really brave. That was really stupid. There's a difference, no. Her voice carried a firmness he rarely heard. It was brave. You didn't let him make you small. Something cracked in Jamie's chest, a fault line opening in the foundation he'd built to keep himself together. 9 years of holding everything in place, of being invisible, of surviving instead of living. And his daughter still saw him as brave. He squeezed her hand. Come on, let's get you some water. They slipped through the service door into the back hallway, leaving the glittering crowd behind. Jamie leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. It was over. He'd survived another reminder of his place in the world, had probably talked himself into disciplinary action, but he'd survived. As they walked toward the break room, neither of them noticed Kate Sterling watching from the shadows, her expression unreadable, something ancient and painful stirring behind her carefully maintained neutrality. The break room smelled like industrial coffee and regret. Jamie poured Lily a cup of water from the cooler while she settled at the small table with her homework. They had 20 minutes before his shift officially ended, 20 minutes of borrowed peace before they'd take the subway back to their apartment in Queens and pretend that the evening had been normal. Dad, what was Mom like? The question hit him like a physical blow. Lily asked about Sarah sometimes, carefully like she was testing whether the subject was safe, but never this directly. Jamie set down his coffee cup, buying himself a moment to formulate an answer that wouldn't crack him open. She was light, Emma. That's the best word I have for her. She walked into a room and everything got brighter. Did she like music? She loved it. Used to say that songs were just feelings that got dressed up and went dancing. Lily smiled, a small thing, but genuine. That sounds like something you'd say. I stole it from her. Most of the good things I say came from her first. Do you miss her? Jamie looked at his daughter, Sarah's eyes, Sarah's smile, Sarah's stubborn tilt of chin when she wanted something. Every minute of every day. Is that why you don't play anymore? The question hung in the air between them, impossible to answer without excavating everything he'd buried. Jamie had told Lily a simplified version of the truth. He used to play piano, stopped after her mother passed. Sometimes people needed breaks from things they loved. He'd never explained the real reason, that playing felt like betrayal, that every time he touched keys he heard Sarah's voice telling him he always played like the keys owed him an apology, teasing and loving and alive. And then he remembered she wasn't alive anymore, and the music turned to ash in his hands. I stopped because it hurt too much. Some things are connected to people, Emma. When you lose the person, the thing changes too. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing this with the seriousness she applied to everything. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out something that made Jamie's heart stop. His old leather notebook. Worn cover, curled edges, filled with half-finished compositions he hadn't looked at in nearly a decade. Bars of melody in his handwriting, scribbled annotations in the margins, a piece titled Emma's Lullaby that he'd started the week before Rachel died and never finished. I found this in your locker. Lily's voice was quiet. I thought maybe you forgot what was inside. Jamie took the notebook with trembling hands. He opened it to a random page, and the notes stared back at him like accusations. Where did you learn to be this brave? From you, Emma's voice was steady, except when you forget you are. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Jamie closed the notebook quickly, tucking it into his vest pocket where it pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. A staff member appeared around the corner. Intermission's ending in 5, Mr. Cooper. Could you do a final sweep of the main floor? Of course. Jamie stood, straightening his uniform with automatic movements. Lily grabbed his hand. Dad. Yes, sweetheart. You still love the piano, don't you? He looked down at her, this small person who'd somehow inherited all of her mother's insight along with her features. I love it the way some people love someone they lost. Quietly, from across the street, never getting too close. Lily was silent for a moment, pencil moving across her sketchbook's page. Then she said something that would change everything. Maybe it's time to cross the street. The second half of the gala began with a soprano performing Puccini. Jamie worked the edges of the room, collecting discarded programs and straightening chairs, while trying to ignore the weight of the notebook in his pocket. Lily had returned to her corner near the service entrance, drawing again with the focused intensity she applied to her art. The soprano finished to polite applause. The MC returned to the stage with announcements about upcoming foundation events. Jamie was about to slip back into the service hallway when a voice stopped him. Leaving so soon? Kate Sterling stood a few feet away, champagne glass in hand, studying him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Up close, she looked younger than her stage presence suggested, 46, maybe 47, with fine lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Just doing my rounds, ma'am. I saw what happened earlier. With Malcolm Reed. Jamie's jaw tightened. I apologize if I disrupted. You didn't. Kate's voice was quiet but firm. He's been disrupting things for 30 years. It was refreshing to see someone actually respond. I shouldn't have. Why not? The question caught him off guard. Because that's not my place. Kate smiled slightly, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her all evening. You sound like someone who spent too long believing what other people told you about yourself. Before Jamie could respond, the MC's voice boomed across the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, before our final performance of the evening, we have a special request from one of our distinguished patrons. Jamie's blood went cold. Malcolm Reed was climbing the stage steps, champagne glass raised, his smile wide and predatory. Our friend from earlier, the poetic Janitor, seems to have quite the connection with our Steinway. I thought perhaps he might grace us with a few notes, scattered laughter, some uncomfortable, some eager. Malcolm's voice carried easily across the sudden quiet. Come now, Janitor. You spoke so eloquently about this magnificent instrument. Surely you can play something. Twinkle, twinkle, perhaps? The laughter swelled. Jamie stood frozen as the spotlight swung toward him. 300 pairs of eyes finding their target. He saw Lily rising from her corner, sketchbook pressed against her chest, face pale with fear. He saw Kate watching him, something like recognition in her eyes. He felt the notebook in his vest pocket. Sarah's songs, Emma's lullaby, everything he'd buried because staying alive was easier than staying awake. Walk away, his mind screamed. Just walk away. That's what invisible men do. But Jamie Cooper wasn't invisible. He never had been. He'd just been pretending. The spotlight burned against his face, hot and unforgiving. Malcolm stood on stage with his arms spread wide, basking in the attention. Come now, don't be shy. You clearly have opinions about this piano. Let's hear if you have any actual talent to match that mouth. Kate stepped closer, her voice low enough that only Jamie could hear. You don't have to do this, I know. Then why aren't you leaving? Jamie looked at her. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded, and there was only this woman with her careful armor and her guarded eyes, eyes that held something he recognized, the same thing he saw in his mirror every morning. Because I've been walking away for 9 years. And I'm tired. He handed her his cloth and bucket. Then he walked toward the stage. The crowd went silent. Even Malcolm's smirk faltered, replaced by genuine surprise. He hadn't expected Jamie to actually accept the challenge. Well, Malcolm recovered quickly, gesturing toward the Steinway with exaggerated courtesy. The floor is yours, Janitor. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. Jamie climbed the 3 steps to the stage. His boots echoed against the polished wood, scuffed and worn, completely out of place among the crystal and silk. He could feel every eye in the room tracking his movement, could feel Malcolm's satisfaction radiating like heat. He stopped in front of the piano. The Steinway gleamed under the lights, its black surface reflecting his face back at him. He looked older than he remembered, more worn, the kind of face that life had used as a punching bag and then forgotten about. Any time now, Malcolm called out. Some of us have better things to do than watch a janitor contemplate furniture. Scattered laughter. Jamie didn't react. He was looking at the keys now, 88 of them, stretching out like old friends he'd abandoned. His fingers twitched at his sides. 9 years. 9 years since he'd played anything more than chopsticks for Lily on a toy keyboard. 9 years since Zucker's funeral, where he'd sat at their home piano and tried to play her favorite piece and couldn't get past the 4th measure before breaking down. Dad. Lily's voice cut through the noise. She'd moved closer to the stage, her sketchbook still pressed against her chest, her eyes wide and scared, and something else, hopeful. It's okay. I know you can do it. Malcolm laughed. How touching. The janitor's daughter believes in him. Someone get this girl a participation trophy. Something shifted in Jamie's chest. Not anger, though that was there, burning low and steady. Something deeper. Something that had been buried so long, he'd forgotten it existed. He turned to face the audience. I didn't come here to perform tonight. I came to clean your floors and empty your trash and make sure no one tripped over a loose cable. That's what I'm paid for. He paused, letting the silence build. But sometimes life doesn't care what you're paid for. Sometimes it just dares you to remember who you used to be. He sat down at the piano. The bench creaked slightly under his weight. His hands hovered over the keys, not touching them yet, just feeling the space between his fingers and the ivory. Go ahead. Malcolm's confidence was returning. We're all waiting for Twinkle. Jamie didn't look at him. He was looking at Lily, his daughter standing near the edge of the stage, her whole body leaning forward like she was trying to will him through this moment. Behind her, Kate watched with an expression he couldn't read. Jamie closed his eyes. He remembered. He remembered the first time he touched a piano, 7 years old in the basement of a church where his mother worked as a cleaner. The instrument was old and out of tune, but when he pressed down on the keys, something inside him woke up. He remembered Juilliard, the scholarship that changed everything, professors who said he had a gift that came along once in a generation. He remembered Rachel, meeting her at a jazz club in the village, her laugh when she told him classical music made her feel like she had to sit up straight, the way she'd close her eyes when he played for her anyway. He remembered the hospital room, the monitors, the moment the doctors told him she was gone, and all he could think was that he'd never hear her laugh at his music again. He remembered becoming invisible. Jamie opened his eyes. He placed his fingers on the keys, and he played. The first note was soft, a single G hanging in the air like a held breath. Some people in the audience shifted, uncertain. This wasn't Twinkle. Then came the second note and the third, and suddenly the melody was unfolding like a flower opening to sun. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. The murmuring stopped. Jamie's fingers moved across the keys with a certainty that surprised even him. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of grief and survival, waiting for permission to emerge. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The music built slowly at first, gentle phrases that spiraled upward like smoke from a candle. Then the tempo shifted and the piece transformed into something more urgent, more desperate. Arpeggios crashed like waves against rocks. The bass notes thundered like distant artillery. In the audience, people leaned forward. Champagne glasses were set down untouched. Conversations died mid-sentence. Kate pressed her hand against her chest, feeling something crack open inside her that she'd kept sealed for decades. Malcolm stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his smirk gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. And Lily watched her father with tears streaming down her face, finally seeing the man she'd always known existed beneath the uniform, in the silence and the careful invisibility. Jamie played through the grief of losing Sarah. He played through the guilt of giving up. He played through 9 years of mopping floors and emptying trash cans and pretending this part of him had died along with his wife. But it hadn't died. It had just been waiting. The ballade reached its central section, a lyrical passage that required not just technical skill, but emotional vulnerability. Jamie didn't hold back. He let every wound show, every scar, every moment of darkness he'd survived. The music spoke of loss, of love that didn't get to finish, of a man who'd buried himself alive and was only now clawing his way back to the surface. A woman in the third row wiped her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Beside her, a man who hadn't cried since his father's funeral felt his throat tighten. The piece built toward its climax, a series of octave runs that demanded everything a pianist had to give. Jamie's hands flew across the keys, the notes cascading like a waterfall, relentless and overwhelming. And then, just as suddenly, the storm quieted. The final section began, tender, heartbroken, beautiful in its resignation. The melody that had raged moments before now whispered like a goodbye said to someone who was already gone. The final chord rang out. Jamie lifted his hands from the keys. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then Lily started clapping. It was small at first, a 9-year-old's hands, soft and uncertain, but the sound broke the spell. Kate rose to her feet, clapping hard, her face wet with tears she didn't try to hide. And then the rest of the room followed. The applause built like a wave, crashing over the hall in a roar that made the chandeliers tremble. People stood. People wept. People who had spent the evening performing their wealth and status suddenly remembered what it felt like to be moved by something real. Jamie sat at the piano, his hands shaking, his vision blurred. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just sat there trying to breathe. trying to understand what had just happened. Lily climbed onto the stage and ran toward him, her sketchbook abandoned somewhere behind her. She crashed into his arms, burying her face against his chest. Dad, I know, sweetheart. His voice cracked. I know. He held her tight, feeling her small body shake with emotion. And for the first time in 9 years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The applause continued, but Jamie barely heard it. He was looking past Lily now, to where Malcolm stood at the edge of the stage. The critic's face was pale, his champagne glass forgotten, his carefully constructed superiority stripped away by something he couldn't dismiss with clever words. Their eyes met. Malcolm looked away first. Jamie rose from the piano bench, Lily's hand gripping his. He walked to the edge of the stage where his cleaning cloth and bucket still sat. He picked them up, the symbolism not lost on anyone. The janitor collecting his supplies after destroying every assumption in the room. But before he could step off the stage, Kate appeared beside him. Where did you train? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Juilliard. A long time ago. Why did you stop? Jamie looked at Lily, then back at Kate. Because the music was connected to someone I lost. And for a while, playing felt like betrayal. Kate nodded slowly. I understand that better than you know. You play? I used to. She glanced at the Steinway. I was a prodigy once. Then I lost a competition that mattered too much, and the people who were supposed to love me anyway didn't. So I stopped. Do you miss it? Every day. Kate's voice was soft, unguarded in a way that seemed to surprise even her, but I convinced myself that missing something was safer than risking it again. Jamie held her gaze. It's not. No. A sad smile crossed her face. I'm beginning to realize that. Behind them, the audience was still buzzing, people standing in clusters, talking animatedly, glancing toward the stage with a mixture of awe and confusion. The program had been abandoned. Nobody cared about the scheduled finale anymore. Lily tugged on Jamie's hand. Dad, everyone's staring. I know, sweetheart, is that bad? Jamie looked at his daughter, the small, brave person who had pushed him to cross the street, who had believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. No, I don't think it's bad at all. Kate touched his arm gently. Don't disappear. Not yet. I wasn't planning to. Good. She straightened, some of her CEO composure returning, but softer now, more human. Because I think we need to talk. About music, about second chances, about what happens when people who've been hiding finally step into the light. Jamie nodded. I'd like that. A staff member approached, whispering urgently to Kate about donors and photo opportunities and the complete deviation from the evening's planned events. Kate waved her away. Tomorrow. She said to Jamie, come to my office, 10 o'clock. I have a shift at 8. Take the morning off. I can't afford to. I'll make sure you can afford it. Kate's voice was firm but kind. This isn't charity, James. It's recognition. There's a difference. He studied her face, looking for the catch, the angle. He'd spent too many years being invisible not to be suspicious of sudden visibility. But he didn't see calculation in her eyes. He saw something else, hope. Okay, tomorrow. Kate smiled, a real smile, the first one he'd seen from her that wasn't practiced or polished. Tomorrow. She walked back toward the crowd, immediately surrounded by donors and board members demanding explanations. Jamie watched her go, still processing everything that had happened. Dad. Yeah, sweetheart. Are you okay? Jamie looked down at Lily. Her face was streaked with dried tears, her hair falling loose from its braid, her eyes bright with something that might have been pride or relief or both. I think so. For the first time in a long time, I think I actually am. They left through the service entrance, the same way they'd come in. The hallway was quiet, the sounds of the gala muffled behind heavy doors. Jamie's cleaning supplies rattled in his bucket as he walked. Dad? Yeah, you played Mom's piece, didn't you? The one you said was too sad. Jamie stopped walking. He hadn't told Lily what he'd played. She'd been too young when Sarah died to remember the music her mother loved. But somehow she knew. Part of it, mixed in with the Chopin. How? I don't know, sweetheart. It just happened. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think she heard you. Jamie felt his throat tighten. You think so? I know so. Lily squeezed his hand. and I think she was proud. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it wasn't the heavy silence of grief anymore. It was something else, something lighter. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, car horns, distant sirens, the murmur of millions of lives intersecting and separating. Jamie looked up at the sky, searching for stars through the light pollution. Dad. Yes, sweetheart. What happens now? Jamie thought about Kate's invitation, about the audience's reaction, about 9 years of invisibility and one moment of terrifying, exhilarating exposure. I don't know, but I think maybe that's okay. Lily smiled. I think so too. They walked toward the subway station, father and daughter, leaving behind the gleaming hall and the glittering guests and the piano that had just changed everything. Jamie still had his cleaning cloth in his pocket, but somehow it felt different now, like it belonged to someone who was just passing through that life on his way to somewhere else. The glass tower rose 43 stories above Midtown Manhattan, its facade reflecting clouds and neighboring buildings in geometric patterns. Jamie stood on the sidewalk at 9:52, staring up at the structure that housed the Sterling Foundation. His cleanest pair of jeans felt inadequate. The button-down shirt he'd ironed that morning already showed wrinkles at the elbows. Around him, people in $1,000 suits moved with the purposeful stride of those who belonged in buildings like this. The elevator was all mirrors and chrome. Jamie watched his reflection multiply into infinity. A 42-year-old man who cleaned floors for a living, surrounded by versions of himself that all looked equally uncertain. The numbers climbed steadily. When the doors opened on the 37th floor, a young woman with a tablet was waiting. Mr. Cooper, I'm Diane, Miss Sterling's assistant. She's expecting you. The reception area looked like something from an architecture magazine. Minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Central Park. Diane led him down a hallway where their footsteps made no sound on carpet thick enough to absorb all evidence of passage. Kate's office wasn't what Jamie had anticipated. No imposing desk dominating the space, no wall of awards and accolades, just comfortable chairs arranged near windows, bookshelves filled with sheet music and worn paperbacks, and in the corner, a baby grand piano that made his breath catch. James. Kate rose from one of the chairs, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. She looked different in daylight, without the armor of evening wear and stage lighting. Black pants and a gray sweater, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The CEO mask had softened into something more human. Thank you for inviting me. How did you sleep? I didn't. Kate smiled slightly. Neither did I. She gestured toward the chairs and they sat, the morning sun streaming through the windows behind them. The city sprawled below, toy cars and ant people moving through their routines, oblivious to the conversation happening hundreds of feet above their heads. Last night, I watched a man who should have been invisible make 300 of the most jaded people in New York. New York cry. Kate leaned forward, elbows on her knees. Do you know how rare that is? I wasn't trying to make anyone cry. That's exactly why it worked. Music is my business, James. I fund orchestras. I sponsor competitions. I sit through hundreds of performances every year. Most of them are technically perfect and emotionally empty. What you did last night was the opposite. Jamie shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. I was just playing. No, you were surviving out loud in front of everyone. Kate's eyes were intense. That's not something you can fake, and it's not something you can teach. It's either there or it isn't. What are you saying? Kate stood and walked to the window, her back to him. I've spent 20 years building this foundation. 20 years convincing wealthy people to fund music programs and support young artists. And do you know what I've learned? What? That most of them don't actually care about the music. They care about tax write-offs, social status, the opportunity to put their names on buildings. She turned to face him. But last night, for about 7 minutes, every single person in that room actually cared. Because of you. Jamie didn't know how to respond. The silence stretched between them, filled with the muted sounds of the city below. I want to fund a program. Kate crossed to her desk and picked up a folder. Not the usual kind, not performances in fancy halls for fancy people. Something real. Music in public schools, in veteran centers, in homeless shelters. Music for people who need it, not just people who can afford it. That sounds incredible. I want you to run it. The words landed like a physical blow. Jamie's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I'm sorry. You heard me. Kate moved back toward the chairs but didn't sit. I did some research after you left last night. Juilliard Scholarship, 1999. Top of your class. Your professor said you had the most natural gift they'd seen in decades. You were supposed to debut with the Philharmonic, but you withdrew a month before the concert. Jamie's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. Your wife died. Yes. And you stopped playing. Yes. Kate set the folder down. I'm not asking you to explain, James. I'm not asking you to justify 9 years of grief. I'm asking you to consider what might happen if you stopped hiding. I'm not hiding. I'm surviving. There's a difference, is there? The question hung between them. Jamie stood, walking to the piano in the corner. He rested his hand on the closed lid, feeling the smooth wood beneath his palm. A 1952 Steinway Model B, if he had to guess. Smaller than the concert grand from last night, but no less capable of beauty. When Sarah died, I couldn't separate the music from her. Every note reminded me of something we'd shared. Every chord felt like a betrayal, like I was trying to move on when moving on was impossible. And now, Jamie paused, searching for words. Last night, for the first time, the music didn't feel like grief. It felt like connection, like she was there listening the way she used to. Kate moved to stand beside him. That's what music is supposed to do. Connect us to what we've lost. Remind us that loss doesn't have to mean the end. It felt like the end for a long time, I know. Her voice was soft. After I lost that competition, when my mother stopped speaking to me, music felt like the enemy, like it had promised me something and then taken it away. So I punished it by walking away. Do you regret it? Every single day. Kate looked at the piano. But regret is just wisdom that arrived too late. The question is what you do with it now. She sat down on the piano bench and lifted the fallboard. For a long moment, she just stared at the keys, her hands hovering, but not touching. I haven't done this in 24 years. You don't have to. I know, she placed her fingers on the keys. But maybe it's time to stop hiding too. She played a single chord, C major, the simplest, most fundamental chord in Western music. It rang through the office, clear and pure. Kate's breath caught, her eyes closing against whatever emotion the sound triggered. Still sounds the same. Pianos remember, even when we forget. She played another chord, then another. A simple progression, nothing complicated, but Jamie could see her hands trembling. When she was 10, she told her mother she wanted to play music for people who were sad, wanted to make them feel less alone. Her mother had called it a waste of talent, insisted that music was for winning, not healing. She was wrong. I know that now. Victoria stopped playing and looked up at him. That's why I need you for this program, because you understand what music is actually for. Not performance, not competition, connection. Jamie sat down on the bench beside her, careful to maintain space between them. I don't know if I can do what you're asking. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a leader. I'm a janitor who happened to play piano once. You're a man who walked through fire and came out carrying a melody. Kate's voice was firm. That's exactly what these programs need. Not someone polished, someone real. On in. And if I fail, then you fail and you try again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Because that's what music teaches us, James. Every wrong note is a chance to find the right one. Every mistake is just practice for success. Jamie looked at the keys beneath his fingers. He pressed one gently, E flat. It hummed in the quiet office. There's something I need to tell you. Last night when I played a ball, I wasn't just playing Chopin. Part of it was something I wrote, something I never finished. For your wife, for Lily. I started it the week before Sarah died. It was supposed to be a lullaby, something I could play for our daughter when she was born. But then Sarah, he stopped, the words catching in his throat. Kate waited, giving him space to continue or retreat as he needed. I never finished it. For 9 years, it sat in that notebook, waiting. Last night, some of it came out. Not consciously, it just emerged. That's because it was ready. Kate's voice was gentle. Some songs take longer to write than others. Some need to wait until the person playing them is ready to hear what they're saying. Jamie nodded slowly. I want to finish it, not just for Lily, for Sarah, for everyone who's ever lost someone and couldn't find the words. Then finish it. Kate stood. Use this piano whenever you want. Use this room, whatever you need. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Kate walked toward the window again, her silhouette backlit by morning sun. When I was 16, the night after I lost that competition, I sat in my room and stared at my hands for 3 hours. I kept thinking, these hands have failed me. These hands will never be good enough. And then my mother walked in. Do you know what she said? What? She said, your hands are fine. It's your heart that's the problem. Too soft, too emotional. Music isn't about feeling, Catherine. It's about precision. Jamie said nothing, sensing she needed to finish. I believed her. For 24 years, I believed that the problem was that I cared too much. So I stopped caring about music, about people, about anything that might hurt me. She turned to face him. Last night, watching you play, I realized something. What? She was wrong. My mother was wrong. Music is nothing but feeling. Precision without emotion is just noise. And the reason I've been so successful in this business, the reason I've built this foundation and funded all these programs, is because deep down I've been trying to prove her wrong, trying to show that heart matters. And you want me to help you prove it. I want you to prove it to yourself, Kate smiled. I've already learned my lesson. Now it's your turn. Jamie looked at the piano, then at Kate, then back at the piano. When would this program start? Whenever you're ready. I still have a job. Bills to pay. The foundation will provide a salary, enough to cover your expenses and then some. You'll have time to create, to teach, to do this properly. And if I'm not good at it, you will be. Her certainty was unshakable. How do you know? Because last night you weren't just playing music, you were saving your own life. And people who can do that, people who can transform their pain into something beautiful, they're the ones who change the world. 3 weeks later, Jamie stood in the doorway of an abandoned chapel on 47th Street, trying to reconcile the reality with Kate's enthusiasm. Dust covered every surface. The windows were so grimy they barely let in light. Plaster had fallen from the ceiling in places, leaving exposed lath like bones showing through skin. It needs work. Kate stood beside him, arms crossed, watching his reaction. The building had been abandoned for 7 years. A community music school that lost its funding and closed its doors. That's one way to put it. But the bones are good. Kate walked inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. And look, in the center of the room, covered with a tarp, sat a piano. Jamie crossed to it and pulled the covering away. A baby grand, decades old, its finish dulled by neglect. He lifted the fallboard and pressed a key. The note came out flat, sour, but the tone was still there underneath the damage. How long has this been empty? 7 years. The foundation acquired it last year, but we never found the right use for it. Until now. Until now. Kate moved to stand beside him. I want to turn this into whatever you need it to be. A teaching space, a rehearsal hall, a place where people can come and remember why music matters. That's a lot of pressure. You've handled worse. Jamie walked the perimeter of the room, his mind already sketching possibilities. The space was larger than it looked from outside. High ceilings, good acoustics, enough room for multiple instruments and students. With work, it could be something special. I talked to Lily last night about everything. The program, the letters, what I want this place to become. What did she say? She asked if she could help design the logo. Kate laughed. A real laugh, unguarded and warm. I like that kid. She likes you too. She's been drawing you. Drawing me? That's what she does. She draws people she's trying to understand. Kate's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. And has she figured me out? She says, you're like a song that's afraid to be heard. The words landed with more impact than Jamie had intended. Kate looked away, pretending to examine a crack in the wall, but he saw her swallow hard. I should tell you something. Malcolm has been making calls to donors, to board members. He's trying to convince them that funding this program is a mistake. Jamie's hands tightened into fists. Why? Because you embarrassed him. Because people like Malcolm need to believe that talent and worth are connected to status. That someone like you couldn't possibly have anything to offer. Kate turned to face him. You threatened his entire worldview in 7 minutes. He's not going to forgive that easily. What does this mean for the program? It means we have enemies. It means some people will try to stop us before we even start. Her voice hardened, but there was something fierce in it too. But it also means we're doing something that matters. You don't make enemies by playing it safe. Jamie looked around the empty chapel at the beast in the cobwebs and the piano waiting to be heard. I've spent 9 years being safe, staying invisible, making sure no one noticed me. And now I have a daughter who believes in me, letters from my wife telling me not to give up, and a woman who thinks I can change something. He met Kate's eyes. Safe doesn't feel like an option anymore. Then let's get to work. The renovation consumed 6 weeks. Jamie arrived before dawn and left after midnight, supervising every detail with the obsessive focus of someone who'd been given a second chance and refused to waste it. Kate found him asleep on a drop cloth more than once, paintbrush still in hand, his face peaceful in a way it never was when he was awake. Lily came every day after school, documenting the transformation in her sketchbook. Her drawings captured the workers carrying lumber, volunteers painting walls, the piano being tuned by a specialist who called it a miracle waiting to happen. She'd turned 10 2 weeks into the renovation, a small celebration with cake from the corner bakery, Kate awkwardly presenting a gift of professional art supplies that made Lily cry. Dad, when do you think Mom stopped being 33? The question came late one evening, just the two of them in the chapel while Jamie touched up paint along the baseboards. What do you mean, sweetheart? Like, in my head, she's always 33. That's how old she was when she died. But if she was still alive, she'd be 42 now, like you. Jamie set down his brush, turning to face his daughter. I don't know, I guess she stopped being any age. She just became a moment, the last moment I saw her alive. Do you think that's sad? I think it's human. Lily sat cross-legged on the freshly painted floor, her sketchbook open to a drawing of Sarah from an old photograph. We hold on to people the way we last knew them, because changing them feels like losing them again. But you're not losing her by finishing the lullaby, right? Jamie crossed to his daughter, kneeling beside her. No, sweetheart, I'm not losing her. I'm just finally saying the goodbye I couldn't say before. What are you going to call this place? We've been thinking about that. Kate wants something that means what we're trying to do here. Not just music, connection, healing. Lily looked up from her drawing, her eyes bright with the same insight that had ambushed him since she was old enough to speak. What about the listening room? The listening room? Because that's what you do, Dad. You don't just play, you listen. To the music, to the people, to the things that need to be heard. Jamie stared at his 10-year-old daughter, this small person who understood what most adults spent lifetimes failing to grasp. The listening room. I think that's perfect. I know. That's why I suggested it. The first students arrived in October, 3 months after the gala. Jamie had expected teenagers looking for college application padding, maybe some adults seeking a hobby. Instead, he found himself facing a room full of people who had been told in one way or another that music wasn't for them. Frank Martinez sat in the back row, his 63-year-old hands trembling against his thighs. Nerve damage from an explosion in Vietnam had stolen the steadiness he'd once possessed. He hadn't touched a piano since 1971, convinced that his damaged hands made beauty impossible. Elena Rodriguez chose the chair nearest the door, ready to flee if necessary. 32 years old, mother of 4, raised in foster care where possessions were temporary and beauty was for other people. She sat at the edge of her seat like the chair might vanish if she relaxed. Marcus Chen stood rather than sat, his 17-year-old frame too restless for stillness. He couldn't make eye contact, couldn't tolerate unexpected sounds, but he heard melodies in everything. The rhythm of the subway, the pattern of rain on windows, the hum of electrical current through walls. Dorothy Williams arrived with her daughter hovering protectively at her elbow. 71 years old, Alzheimer's slowly erasing the woman she'd been, but her fingers still knew Gershwin even when she couldn't remember her granddaughter's name. Her daughter had brought her in desperation, hoping music might preserve what medication couldn't. Jamie stood before them, his heart pounding against his ribs. I'm not going to teach you technique. Not yet. First, I need you to understand something. They waited, skeptical and hopeful in equal measure. Music isn't about perfection. It's not about playing the right notes in the right order. It's about saying the things you can't say with words. He looked at each of them in turn, Frank with his trembling hands, Elena with her flight-ready posture, Marcus with his eyes fixed on a point past Jamie's shoulder, Dorothy with her clouded gaze. Some of you haven't played in decades. Some of you have never played at all. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here, and being here means you're ready to listen. Frank raised his trembling hand. What if we can't listen? I mean, what if there's too much noise in our heads? Jamie walked toward him, his voice gentle. Then we start there. We play the noise. We give it a voice. And eventually the noise becomes music. That sounds like therapy. It is therapy. The oldest kind. Elena spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I belong here. I can't afford proper lessons, and I don't have a piano at home. This program is free. Jamie interrupted her spiral before it could gain momentum. Every lesson, every hour, every note. And if you need a piano at home, we'll find you one. That's what we do here. Why? Elena's eyes were wet. Why would you do that for strangers? Jamie thought about Sarah's letters, about 9 years of silence, about Lily pushing him to cross the street. Because someone did it for me once, and it saved my life. Kate came to observe during the third week of classes. She sat in the back of the room trying to be invisible, something her CEO presence made difficult, while Jamie worked with Marcus on a simple melody. The teenager's fingers moved tentatively over the keys, his face scrunched in concentration that bordered on pain. Listen, don't think. Listen to what the piano is telling you. Pianos don't talk. They do if you know how to hear them. Marcus played a note, then another, a simple pattern that somehow captured the rhythm of his breathing, the cadence of his internal world made audible. That's it. That's your sound. It's just notes. It's never just notes, Marcus. It's you, everything you feel, everything you can't say. It's right there in those keys. You just have to trust it. Marcus played the pattern again, more confidently this time. A smile flickered across his face. Brief, barely there, but real. In the back of the room, Kate felt something tighten in her chest, something she'd thought she'd successfully excavated years ago. After the lesson, she waited until the students had gone before approaching Jamie. How do you do that? Do what? Connect with them. Make them trust you so quickly. Jamie was wiping down the piano keys, a ritual he performed after every session. I don't try to teach them. I try to see them. There's a difference. You make it look easy. It's not. He set down the cloth and faced her. Every person who walks through that door is carrying something heavy. Fear, grief, shame. The hardest part isn't teaching them music. It's convincing them they deserve to be heard. Kate was silent for a moment, absorbing this. I never had a teacher like you. What were your teachers like? Precise, demanding. They cared about competitions and rankings and whether my technique would impress judges. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. I was 15 before I realized that I played for them, not for myself. What happened when you realized? I kept playing for them anyway because I didn't know any other way. Jamie studied her face, seeing past the careful neutrality to something wounded beneath. You could learn. Learn what? To play for yourself, to remember why you started in the first place. I'm 46 years old, James, a little late for that. Says who? Kate opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She looked at the piano, at the keys she hadn't touched except for that one morning in her office. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Yes, you would. Jamie moved to the piano bench and sat down, leaving space beside him. The beginning is always the same. You sit down, you breathe, and you remember who you were before someone told you who to be. Kate didn't move. I'm scared. The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest in a way that felt dangerous. I know. It's been so long. The piano doesn't care. What if I can't? Then you can't. And you try again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, because that's what we do here. We keep trying until the music comes back. Kate stood frozen, the distance between herself and the piano bench feeling vast as an ocean. Then slowly she walked forward and sat beside him. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling. I played Moonlight Sonata at my last competition. The third movement. I'd practiced it for 6 months. Every note perfect, every transition flawless. What happened? I made a mistake in the final passage. 3 wrong notes that probably no one but the judges noticed. Her voice cracked. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. That's not about music. That's about control. I know that now. Kate stared at the keys, but knowing doesn't make it easier to start again. Nothing makes it easier. You just do it anyway. She pressed a key, middle C. The note rang out, clear and true. That's 1. Kate continued, D then E. A simple scale, halting and uncertain. I feel ridiculous. You look brave. By the time she reached the octave, tears were streaming down her face. Why does this hurt so much? Because you're feeling something real for the first time in 20 years. Kate stopped playing and looked at him, her mask gone completely. My mother died last year. Breast cancer. Quick and brutal. I'm sorry. She never apologized. Not for any of it. The pressure, the silence, the way she made me feel like love was something I had to earn. Kate's voice broke. I thought when she died, I'd feel free, but I just felt emptier. Jamie reached over and covered her hand with his. Grief doesn't follow rules. You can be angry at someone and still miss them. You can resent what they did and still wish they were here. How do you do it? How do you carry Sarah with you without drowning? I don't carry her anymore. I let her live in the music. Every time I play, she's there. Not as weight, but as light. Kate wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to do it today. You just have to be willing to try. She looked at the piano, then back at him. Will you teach me? Not like those other teachers, not about technique, about feeling. Jamie nodded. I'd be honored. They sat together at the piano for another hour, not playing complicated pieces, just exploring, finding sounds, letting the music speak what words couldn't. When Kate finally left that evening, she paused at the door. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. Not the foundation, not the money, just me showing. That's what the listening room is for. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 2 months into the program. Jamie was working with Elena on a simple piece when Kate appeared in the doorway, her face pale in a way that made his stomach drop. Can we talk? In private? They stepped into the small office Jamie had claimed, little more than a closet with a desk and filing cabinet. Kate closed the door and leaned against it. We lost the Thorn donation, $400,000. Jamie felt the floor shift beneath him. How bad is it? Without that funding, we can run 3 more months. Then we close. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the strain underneath. The board wants proof of impact by end of quarter, or I'm out as CEO. What would prove impact? A donor recital. Fill the room with major funders. Show them what we're doing here. Kate met his eyes. But we need professional level performance. The students aren't ready. Then we get them ready. James, we have 8 weeks. Sarah died giving me Lily. He said it quietly, without drama. I've survived worse than an 8-week deadline. Elena stopped coming to lessons. Jamie found her apartment in a housing project in the Bronx, 4th floor walk-up with peeling paint and the smell of cooking oil saturating everything. She opened the doorway with a baby on her hip, 2 more children visible behind her in the cramped living room. Mr. Cooper. Her voice carried embarrassment and something deeper. Shame. You weren't in class. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Childcare fell through. I can't afford a sitter for lessons. Tears welled in her eyes. I shouldn't have signed up. It was stupid to think I could do this. Behind her, the oldest daughter appeared, maybe 11, with Elena's dark eyes. Mom cries after you leave because she misses the piano. Jamie's chest tightened. Elena, what if we could arrange childcare? A scholarship fund specifically for situations like this. You'd do that? The program exists for people who need it, not people who can afford it. Elena broke down completely, the baby fussing in her arms while her other children gathered around, confused and concerned. Jamie stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how inadequate his solutions were against the immensity of her struggles. But Elena came back the next week, and her playing carried a fierceness it hadn't possessed before. Frank's PTSD returned with the fireworks on the 4th of July. His wife called Jamie at 2 in the morning, her voice tight with worry. He won't talk to me, just sits on the porch staring at nothing. Says he's embarrassing himself, should quit the program. Jamie drove to their house in Queens, a small ranch with a chain-link fence and roses growing wild in the front yard. Frank sat on the porch steps, his trembling hands pressed between his knees. You know what courage is, Frank? Not running from a firefight. It's playing piano with trembling hands in front of people who might pity you. Jamie sat beside him on the steps. That's courage. Frank's jaw worked, his eyes wet. I'm 73 years old, too old to be crying over goddamn fireworks. You survived a war that killed 58,000 Americans. You're allowed to cry about whatever the hell you want. They sat in silence for a while, the summer night humid and thick around them. Finally, Frank spoke. My squad leader used to play harmonica. After firefights, when we couldn't sleep, he'd play these slow, sad songs, just to remind us we were still human. What happened to him? Didn't make it home. Then play for him, play for every man who didn't get the chance. Frank returned to lessons the following week, and his piece for the recital became a memorial for brothers lost. Dorothy's Alzheimer's progressed faster than anyone had anticipated. Some days she couldn't remember where she was, couldn't recognize her daughter's face, but when her fingers touched the piano keys, something unlocked. The music lived in a different part of her brain, protected from the disease by neurological quirks no one fully understood. Her daughter pulled Jamie aside after a lesson, her face drawn with exhaustion. Should I pull her from the recital? She won't remember it anyway. She'll remember it while she's playing. That's what matters. But after doesn't exist for her anymore. Only now, and right now, in this moment, she's fully herself. Don't take that away because of what comes later. The panic attack hit Jamie during a rehearsal in week 7. He was demonstrating a passage for the students when his hands suddenly froze mid-phrase. The room tilted, his vision tunneling to a pinpoint. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't remember where he was or why. Flashback to the gala, Malcolm's laughter, 300 staring eyes, the weight of their judgment pressing down until he couldn't move. Mr. Cooper, are you okay? The students' voices came from very far away. Jamie's chest constricted, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. He staggered backward, his hip hitting the piano bench. Everyone out. Now. Kate's voice cut through the chaos with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The students filed out reluctantly, casting worried glances over their shoulders. When the door closed, Kate knelt beside where Jamie had collapsed on the floor. Breathe with me. In, out. It took 20 minutes before he could speak, before the room stopped spinning and his vision cleared. When he finally looked at Kate, the shame was overwhelming. I can't do this. I'll ruin everything. Again, you didn't ruin anything the first time. Sarah's death wasn't your fault. I gave up for 9 years. What if I give up again? Kate sat down on the floor beside him, her expensive pants collecting dust she didn't seem to notice. You want to know why I really stopped playing? Jamie nodded, still struggling to regulate his breathing. Competition day, I saw my mother in the audience. She looked disappointed before I even started. Kate's voice was soft, remembering. I made those 3 mistakes because part of me wanted to fail, to escape. She paused, letting that sit between them. I've been running from that moment for 24 years. But watching you, watching our students, I'm learning something. What? That failure isn't trying and falling short. Failure is not trying at all. The door creaked open. Lily stood in the doorway, Kate's assistant behind her looking apologetic. She'd been listening, tears tracking down her face. She pulled something from her backpack, her sketchbook, open to a drawing of Jamie surrounded by students. The title written at the bottom, Dad Teaching People to Be Brave. Jamie broke down again, but different this time. Cathartic rather than catastrophic. Lily crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. How did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. Not Mom. You, Dad. The recital night arrived like an execution date. The chapel had been transformed, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, lighting rigged to make the space feel professional rather than makeshift. 500 people filled the seats, donors in tailored suits beside neighborhood families in their Sunday best. Board members mixing with veterans and single mothers and teenagers who'd never set foot in a concert hall. Kate found Jamie backstage, pacing like a caged animal. Whatever happens, thank you. For what? for reminding me why I started this foundation. Frank played first, his original composition capturing the sound of rain on a tin roof, a memory from his childhood before Vietnam, before everything changed. His hands trembled, the notes imperfect, but something in the music transcended technical precision. It spoke of loss and survival, of things that couldn't be articulated any other way. When he finished, his wife stood up crying and smiling simultaneously. The standing ovation that followed felt like vindication. Elena performed with all four of her children, teaching them what Jamie had taught her. They played a simple piece arranged for multiple hands, and the message was clear. Beauty is something we can give each other. Marcus Chen's composition was performed with a small ensemble he'd assembled from his NYO classmates. Nonlinear, surprising, completely unique. The music critics in attendance scribbled notes furiously, recognizing the emergence of a talent that would shape the field. Dorothy played Gershwin's Someone to Watch Over Me with flawless technique despite her clouded mind. For 3 minutes, she wasn't a woman losing her memories. She was just a musician doing what she was born to do. Malcolm Reed sat in the third row throughout, his face cycling through expressions, skepticism giving way to confusion, giving way to something that might have been regret. Jamie took the stage last, Lily's hand in his. He'd told Kate he would play a 5-minute version of the lullaby, incomplete, ending on an unresolved chord. The audience wouldn't understand, but Lily would. 9 years ago, my wife died, giving birth to our daughter. I stopped playing because it felt like betrayal. But my daughter saved me. And tonight, I'm playing something I started before she was born. He paused, meeting Lily's eyes. It's not finished yet. Maybe it never will be, but that's okay. The best things rarely are. The melody emerged gentle at first, tender, the kind of music you'd hum to a baby falling asleep. But it grew more complex, layers building. Speaking of loss and love, and a man standing in a hospital room holding his newborn daughter, while the woman he loved slipped away. It also spoke of healing, of a little girl who drew pictures and asked hard questions and pushed her father to cross the street, of letters that arrived exactly when they were needed, of second chances that appeared when you stopped hiding. The final chord hung unresolved in the air, a question without an answer. Some in the audience looked confused. Others understood implicitly. Lily ran on stage and wrapped her arms around her father. It's perfect, Dad. Perfect because it's unfinished. Like us. Like everyone. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. But more importantly, the donors huddled with the board afterward and the numbers shifted. Richard Thorne, who'd pulled his initial funding, stood to make an announcement. I've funded 100 programs. Most forgot why they existed. This program remembers. 400,000 reinstated, plus 200,000 more. Other donors matched the commitment. Total funding, 1.2 million over 3 years. Kate cried publicly for the first time in 2 decades. Hours later, alone in the empty chapel, Kate found Jamie at the piano. You did it. You did it. This was your vision. No, it was our vision. She took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't been in a relationship since my 20s. I'm controlling and difficult and I work too much. But with you, I remember who I was before all that. And I think I want to know what happens if I stop running. Jamie thought about Sarah's letters, about her instructions that love wasn't about finding someone who completes you, but someone who sees you clearly and stays anyway. I've been ready for a while, just afraid to admit it. They almost kissed, Lily's voice breaking the moment. Are you going to kiss her or just stare? They laughed, tension breaking like fever. Jamie turned to Kate. So what do we do now? Now we play. They sat at the piano and began a duet, simple and imperfect, but theirs. The notes floated through the empty chapel, out into the night, up toward whatever stars could penetrate the city's light pollution. And somewhere, Jamie knew Sarah was listening, not with sadness, with joy, because the man she loved had finally found his way home. 6 months after the recital that saved the listening room, Jamie stood in the original chapel watching autumn light stream through windows they'd scrubbed clean. 300 square feet of possibility had multiplied into 3 locations across the city, Queens, the Bronx, and a storefront in Brooklyn donated by a board member who'd watched Dorothy Williams play Gershwin and remembered why music mattered. 63 students now, ranging from 7 to 74, each carrying their own weight of things unsaid. Frank Martinez taught veteran workshops on Thursday evenings, his trembling hands no longer a source of shame, but proof that survival takes many forms. Elena had completed her associate degree in music education, funded by a listening room scholarship that Kate had established specifically for parents rebuilding their lives. Marcus Chen split his time between NYU composition seminars and weekend sessions, where he worked with younger students on the spectrum, teaching them that different minds hear different music. Dorothy had passed in her sleep 3 months ago. At her funeral, Jamie had played Someone to Watch Over Me while her daughter sobbed in the front pew, and 73 people who'd never met the woman understood something essential about what it means to be remembered. Lily turned 10 and a half during a November morning that felt more like September, the city refusing to acknowledge winter's approach. Kate had organized a party at the chapel, small, intimate, just the core volunteers and a few students. Lily opened her gifts with the careful deliberation she applied to everything, but when she reached Kate's offering, a complete set of professional drafting pencils and archival quality paper, her composure cracked. "You didn't have to do this." Kate knelt beside her, close enough that Jamie could see the vulnerability in his partner's face. "Yes, I did. Artists deserve the right tools." The word partner still felt foreign in Jamie's mouth, though they'd been together officially for 6 months. Kate had moved nothing into his apartment, and he'd claimed no space in her penthouse. But they existed in each other's lives with the permanence of growth rather than invasion. She kept a toothbrush in his bathroom. He had a key to her office. They'd learned to navigate the distance between their worlds by building a third one that belonged to neither and both. On a Wednesday afternoon that smelled like coming snow, a woman in her late 20s appeared at the chapel entrance. Well-dressed but not ostentatious, carrying herself with the careful posture of someone who'd learned to take up minimal space despite her height and presence. She waited until Jamie finished working with a student before approaching. "My name is Sophia Reed. Sophia, I need to talk about my father." The surname landed like a punch. Jamie's shoulders tensed automatically, muscle memory of humiliation flooding back. Sophia noticed the reaction, and her expression tightened with something that looked like shame. "He doesn't know I'm here, but I need your help." She was a music teacher in Queens Public Schools, she explained. Had a 7-year-old student named Aisha, refugee from Syria, who'd arrived speaking no English and carrying trauma no child should have to hold. But the girl could play piano by ear, reproducing anything she heard after a single listening. Prodigy-level gift trapped inside a body that had learned silence as survival. "I think music could save her, but I can't reach her alone." Jamie leaned against the piano, processing. "Why come to me? Why not your father's connections?" Sophia's laugh carried decades of bitterness compressed into a single exhalation. "You don't know my father very well, do you? He pushed me into piano at 5. Private lessons, competitions, constant pressure to be perfect. I won every competition until I was 14. Then I realized I hated it. Hated piano, hated performing, hated the person it was turning me into. So I quit. Became a teacher instead. Teaching kids to love music, not fear it." Sophia's jaw set. "My father hasn't spoken to me in 12 years. Says I wasted my gift." Jamie studied her face, seeing Malcolm's features softened and rearranged into someone who'd chosen compassion over conquest. "You want me to teach Aisha? I want you to do what you did for those students at the recital. Remind her that music is safe, that she deserves to be heard. Bring her tomorrow." 4 o'clock. The following afternoon, Aisha arrived, clutching Sophia's hand with white-knuckled intensity. 7 years old, dark eyes that had witnessed things no paperwork would ever fully document, hijab covering hair that Sophia said was the same deep brown as her own had been at that age. She wouldn't look at Jamie, wouldn't speak, wouldn't release her teacher's hand even when invited to approach the piano. Jamie didn't push. He simply sat at the bench and began playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, letting the melody fill the chapel's acoustic space. Halfway through the second phrase, Aisha's grip loosened. By the third movement, she'd taken 2 steps forward. When the piece concluded, she was standing beside the piano, her small hand resting on its curved side as if drawing strength from the vibrations still humming through the wood. He played it again. This time Aisha climbed onto the bench beside him, her feet dangling high above the pedals. She watched his hands with the intensity of someone trying to memorize a map to safety. When he finished, she placed her own fingers on the keys, tentative, testing, and played back what she'd just heard. Note perfect, emotionally exact. Jamie's breath caught. How long has she been able to do this? Since she arrived. Sophia's voice was thick, but she won't perform, won't speak about it, won't engage unless the music is already happening. They worked together for 45 minutes, Jamie playing short phrases and Aisha echoing them back with increasing confidence. By the session's end, she'd played a complete piece, not copied, but created, something that sounded like Damascus and displacement and desperate hope all compressed into melody. When they were packing up, the door burst open with enough force to slam against the wall. Malcolm Reed stood in the entrance, his silver hair disheveled in a way Jamie had never seen at the gala, his expensive coat unbuttoned despite the November cold. "Get away from my granddaughter." The words came out harsh, but underneath Jamie heard something else. Fear, the primal terror of a man watching his last chance at redemption slip away. Sophia stepped between them, her body language shifting into protection mode. "How did you—" "Your school receptionist recognized my name, called to congratulate me on my granddaughter's musical talent." Malcolm's eyes stayed fixed on Jamie. "I assume she didn't mention that this charlatan is using traumatized children for publicity." Jamie stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "The only person using children here is you. You used Sophia until she broke. You know nothing about my daughter. He knows exactly what you did." Sophia's voice shook but held firm. "Because you did the same thing to those students you mocked. You need music to be about winning because if it's about feeling, you have nothing." Malcolm's face flushed, the mask of control slipping to reveal something raw and wounded beneath. "I came here to protect Aisha from—" "From what? From someone who wants to help her heal?" Sophia took a step toward her father. "Or from becoming another version of me, talented and miserable and convinced that every mistake means she's worthless?" Behind them, forgotten in the argument, Aisha had climbed back onto the piano bench. She began playing again, not Debussy this time, but something of her own creation. The melody spoke of raised voices and broken things and a child who'd learned that adults fought and children disappeared. The music silenced them all. Malcolm turned toward the sound, and something in his expression cracked open. He stood frozen, watching his granddaughter transform her fear into notes that hung in the air like accusations he couldn't dismiss with clever words. When Aisha finished, she looked directly at Jamie for the first time. "Mr. Cooper, did I play good?" Jamie knelt beside the bench, eye level with this small survivor who'd just spoken her first English in his presence. "You played your truth. That's the only good that matters." Malcolm left without another word, but the damage had been done. Jamie knew men like him didn't retreat. They regrouped. The article appeared in the Sunday Times 3 days later. Malcolm's byline attached to 1,500 words of calculated destruction. The listening room, feel-good scam or legitimate arts education. The headline asked a question the text had already answered. Jamie Cooper, the piece claimed, exploited vulnerable students for emotional manipulation, lacking any certified music education credentials. The foundation wasted donor money funding unqualified staff. Students were used as props in fundraising theater designed to extract sympathy dollars from guilty, wealthy people. Kate called at 7 in the morning, her voice tight with the kind of control that preceded explosion. "Have you seen it?" "Just finished." Jamie stood at his kitchen window watching the city wake up, Lily still asleep in her room. "How bad?" 3 major donors called before 6. "They want emergency meetings. Board has scheduled a session for Friday." "What do we do?" Kate's silence stretched long enough that Jamie thought the call had dropped. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decisions being made in real time. "We fight, but I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the program anymore." Malcolm's making it personal. "Donors are scared of controversy, and scared donors are useless donors. So we convince them. It's not that simple." Her breath came through the phone like static. "The board is going to demand accountability. They're going to want someone to blame." Friday's emergency session happened in the Sterling Foundation's boardroom, 43 floors above street level, where the city looked like a toy model of itself. 12 board members sat around a table that cost more than Jamie's annual salary. their faces arranged in various configurations of concern and calculation. Kate stood at the head of the table, her CEO armor fully deployed. I've asked James Cooper to join us because the allegations directly reference his qualifications and methods. Richard Thorne, the donor who'd pulled and then reinstated funding, leaned forward. With all due respect, Catherine, the question isn't whether Mr. Cooper is a good teacher. The question is whether we can afford the perception that we're funding an amateur operation. Perception built on lies written by a man with a personal vendetta. Lies that are being repeated by other outlets. Thorne pushed a folder across the table. 3 articles in the past 2 days questioning the program's legitimacy. 2 parent groups have filed complaints with the city about unlicensed instruction. Jamie spoke for the first time since entering the room. Those complaints came from families whose children never attended our program. They're manufactured, which is irrelevant if the damage is done. A woman Jamie didn't recognize, late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of face that made a career of saying no, tapped perfectly manicured nails against the table. The foundation cannot survive this kind of scrutiny. Our reputation underwrites hundreds of programs. If we lose credibility here, we lose it everywhere. So what are you proposing? The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We're proposing that you make a choice, Catherine. The program or your position. We'll continue funding the listening room under new management, or you can maintain your CEO role and we shut down this particular initiative. That's not a choice. That's extortion. That's governance. The foundation is bigger than one program and bigger than your personal investment in it. We need you to be rational. Kate's hands flattened against the table, her knuckles white with pressure. You're asking me to fire the person who created this program because a vindictive critic wrote a hit piece? We're asking you to consider what's best for the foundation's future. Jamie stood, the movement drawing every eye in the room. You don't need to do this. If keeping me costs the program, then I'll go. Find someone with credentials and no controversy. What matters is that the work continues. Kate turned to face him, and Jamie saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. Don't be noble. This isn't about you stepping aside. This is about them demanding I betray what we built because they're afraid of bad press. The board member who'd been silent until now, an older black man with gray beard and kind eyes, cleared his throat. I've been on this board for 17 years, watched Catherine transform this foundation from a tax shelter into something that actually changes lives. And I've never seen her as passionate about anything as she is about this program. He paused, letting that weight settle. So I have to ask, are we really going to let Malcolm Reed dictate our decisions? A man who spent 30 years tearing down artists to make himself feel important? The mood in the room shifted slightly, pressure redistributing. But the woman with the manicured nails pressed forward. The question isn't about Malcolm Reed's character. It's about our fiduciary responsibility. If Catherine can't separate her personal relationship with Mr. Cooper from her professional judgment, then perhaps she's not the right person to lead this organization forward. The words landed like napalm. Kate's face went white, then flushed with anger Jamie had never seen her display publicly. My personal relationship has nothing to do with my professional judgment. The listening room works because it addresses a need no other program fills. We've documented outcomes, students who've rejoined society, families strengthened, veterans managing PTSD through music instead of medication. Those are facts, not feelings. Facts that are being questioned by the press. Then we present better facts. We invite critics to observe. We offer transparency. The woman shook her head. The damage is done, Catherine. The only question is how we contain it. Kate looked around the table, seeing the decision already made in most faces. The board would vote her out if she fought this, would kill the program out of spite if she chose defiance over compliance. She'd spent 20 years building this foundation into something that mattered, and now it was a weapon being aimed at the things she cared about most. Jamie watched her calculate options, saw the moment she arrived at a conclusion that would cost her everything. I'm calling a press conference. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Catherine, that's not advisable. It's not a request. I'm still CEO until you vote me out, and I'm using that authority to address these allegations publicly. The conference room at the Sterling Foundation filled with the reporters by 9:45. their cameras and recorders transforming the space into an arena. Kate stood at the podium looking more vulnerable than Jamie had ever seen her. No armor, no mask, just a woman about to burn down everything she'd built for the sake of something she believed in more. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO of the Sterling Foundation. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction, overlapping into incomprehensible noise. Kate raised a hand and the chaos settled into restless waiting. I'm stepping down because I've learned something in the past 6 months that I should have understood 20 years ago. Leadership isn't about protecting institutions. It's about protecting the work that matters, even when that work is inconvenient or controversial or threatens the comfortable status quo. She paused, her eyes finding Jamie in the back of the room. The listening room exists because music education in this country has become something only accessible to people who can afford it. We charge nothing. We turn no one away. We meet people where they are, and we help them find their voices. That work is messy. It's not easily measured by traditional metrics. It doesn't produce convenient data points for grant reports, but it changes lives. I've watched it happen. I've experienced it myself. A reporter raised her hand. Miss Sterling, are you and Mr. Cooper romantically involved? Kate didn't hesitate. Yes. And that has nothing to do with my professional decision. But if loving someone who reminds me why I started this work is a conflict of interest, then I accept that judgment and remove myself from the position where it matters. She straightened, her voice gaining strength. I'll remain on the board. I'll dedicate myself full-time to the listening room as co-director with James Cooper. Because I've spent 20 years building a foundation that funds programs, and I've realized I'd rather build one program that actually changes the world. The press conference ended with more questions than answers, but the statement had been made. Kate walked off the stage directly to where Jamie stood, ignoring the reporters calling her name. You just gave up everything. I gave up a title. She took his hand. I kept everything that matters. Malcolm appeared at the chapel a week later, his arrival announced by Sophia's surprised intake of breath. He stood in the doorway holding a small bouquet of flowers clutched awkwardly like a teenager on a first date. His expensive coat was buttoned against the December cold, but something in his posture suggested the chill came from inside. I'd like to speak with Mr. Cooper, if I may. Jamie was working with Aisha, the girl having progressed from silent mimicry to actual conversation in the 3 weeks since her first visit. She looked up at Malcolm's voice and her body tensed, preparing for flight. It's okay. Jamie kept his voice gentle. Mr. Reed is just visiting. He's the mean man from before. Yes, but sometimes mean people are just scared people who forgot how to be anything else. Malcolm flinched as if struck. The observation from a 7-year-old carried more weight than any adult accusation could have managed. He approached slowly, keeping his movements telegraphed and non-threatening. May I listen? To you play? Aisha looked to Jamie for permission. He nodded and she turned back to the piano. She played her composition about Syria, about home and loss, and the strange kindness of strangers in a country whose language she was still learning. The music held all the complexity she couldn't yet express in English, all the grief she was too young to process any other way. When she finished, Malcolm stood very still. Then unexpectedly, he sat down on the bench beside her. That was beautiful. And I know something about beautiful music because I've spent my life writing about it. He paused. But I forgot that the most beautiful music isn't about being perfect. It's about being true. Aisha studied him with the unnerving directness of children who'd learned to evaluate adults for threat level. Are you Sophia's daddy? I am. She says you used to be mean to her about piano. I was. I thought I was helping her, but I was really just trying to fix my own fears by making her perfect. And that's not what parents are supposed to do. What are parents supposed to do? Malcolm's voice cracked. They're supposed to love their children no matter what. Even when they make mistakes, even when they disappoint you, even when they quit piano and become teachers instead of concert performers. Sophia had been standing frozen by the door, but now she moved forward. Dad, I'm sorry. He looked at his daughter with eyes that had finally run out of pride to hide behind. I'm sorry I made you feel like my love had conditions. I'm sorry I took something you loved and turned it into something you hated. I'm sorry I've wasted 12 years being angry instead of being your father. Sophia's face crumpled. Sorry doesn't erase 12 years, I know. But maybe I could start by learning what music is actually for. He turned to Jamie. You mentioned a beginner class. Do you still have space? We make space for anyone willing to learn. Even critics who are learning to hear differently, especially them. The benefit recital was scheduled for mid-December, a fundraiser designed to showcase the program's impact to potential donors and counter Malcolm's narrative with evidence. 500 seats in a borrowed concert hall, every ticket purchased by someone who'd read the articles and wanted to decide for themselves whether the listening room was legitimate or scam. Kate had worked 15-hour days for 3 weeks securing the venue, coordinating press, managing logistics, while simultaneously transitioning her CEO responsibilities to her replacement. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. But when Jamie suggested she rest, she'd fixed him with a look that made him drop the subject. Lily had created programs for the event, hand-drawn covers featuring musical notes transforming into flowers, roots growing down into soil made of staff lines. The image suggested growth and depth and connection, all the things the program tried to cultivate. A gallery downtown had offered her a show in the spring, unprecedented for an artist who wouldn't turn 11 until March. Backstage felt like controlled chaos. Frank paced in his dress uniform, the medals on his chest catching light as he moved. Elena corralled her 4 children, all of them wearing matching outfits she'd sewn herself. Marcus stood alone with his eyes closed, his hands moving in patterns that mimicked the piece he'd composed. Dorothy's daughter was there too, carrying her mother's program from the last recital, determined to honor her memory by attending. Jamie found Kate in the empty orchestra pit, staring up at the stage where a single spotlight illuminated the grand piano. You ready? I don't know what ready feels like anymore. She turned to face him. I gave up 20 years of work for this. If it fails, it won't. You don't know that. Jamie took her hands, feeling the tension thrumming through her body like an over-tightened string. When I played at the gala, I thought if I failed, I'd prove Malcolm right, that people like me don't belong on stages like that. But you know what I learned? What? That belonging isn't about other people's permission. It's about showing up and telling the truth even when your hands are shaking. The performance began with Frank, his trembling hands now a visible testament to survival rather than weakness. He'd composed a piece for his squad leader, the man who'd played harmonica after firefights to remind them they were still human. The music captured both the horror and the grace, the way beauty persisted even in places designed to destroy it. When he finished, the audience didn't just applaud, they understood. You could see it in their faces, the shift from skeptical observation to genuine recognition. Elena performed with her children, their multiple hand arrangement transforming simple melody into something that spoke about family and resilience and the radical act of creating beauty when the world insists you don't deserve it. Her youngest daughter missed a note near the end and looked up in panic, but Elena just smiled and kept playing, teaching in real time that mistakes are part of the music, not separate from it. Marcus Chen's premiere showcased the composition that had earned him a full scholarship and recording contract. He performed with an ensemble of musicians who'd followed his career trajectory with increasing interest. The piece was technically complex and emotionally demanding, requiring the kind of integration between intellect and feeling that most composers spent lifetimes trying to achieve. He was 17 and already better than good, already changing the conversation about what music could do. Aisha played last among the students, Sophia standing in the wings where the girl could see her if she needed reassurance. She performed her Syria piece with 7-year-old hands that understood loss better than most adults ever would. The melody captured displacement and hope in equal measure, spoke of a home that existed only in memory and a future that was still taking shape. When she finished, she spoke into the microphone with the careful pronunciation of someone learning a new language. This is for my mama. She's still in Damascus. I hope she hears. The audience rose as one. Several people were openly weeping. Malcolm sat in the second row throughout, his face cycling through emotions Jamie could only partially decode. When Aisha played, something in his expression suggested he was seeing his own daughter's career through different eyes, understanding finally what he'd stolen by demanding perfection instead of offering love. Jamie took the stage with Kate beside him, both of them dressed simply. No formal wear, no pretense. They decided to perform together, a duet version of the lullaby that Jamie had finally completed. 9 months ago, I started writing a song for my daughter that I couldn't finish because the grief was too heavy. But I've learned something in the past year. He looked at Kate, then out at Lily in the front row. Grief doesn't have to be the end, it can be the beginning. And the best music isn't created alone. It's created in communion with people who see you clearly and stay anyway. Kate stepped forward. Tonight we're playing the complete version, together, because that's what the listening room is about. Not performing for others, but connecting with them. Not pretending we're whole, but showing our broken places and trusting that someone will meet us there. They sat at the piano, their hands finding starting position. Jamie began with the melody he'd written 10 years ago, the tender, heartbreaking section about Sarah and loss and a baby girl born into grief. But now Kate's part joined in, her harmonies speaking of healing and second chances and the way love could emerge from ruin if you were brave enough to let it. The music built in complexity, their two voices weaving together into something neither could have created alone. The melody spoke of hospital rooms and empty apartments and nights spent wondering if survival was the same as living. But it also spoke of small hands holding sketchbooks, of letters arriving exactly when needed, of piano benches shared between two people learning to be whole again. The climax came not in volume but in vulnerability, both of them playing with every wound visible, every scar exposed, every moment of doubt transformed into notes that hung in the air like prayers. The audience disappeared. The critics disappeared. Even the stakes disappeared. There was only the music and the truth it carried, and two people brave enough to play it. The resolution was gentle, settling into peace rather than triumph. The final chord resonated through the hall, and in that moment before applause broke the spell, Jamie thought he heard Sarah's voice, not witty, sad, not angry, just proud. Proud that he'd finished what he started. Proud that he'd found someone else to love without forgetting how to love her. Proud that their daughter was watching and learning that loss didn't have to mean the end. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Kate gripped Jamie's hand on the piano bench, tears streaming down her face, making no effort to hide them. "We did it. You did it. This was always your vision." No, her voice was fierce despite the tears. "It was ours. From the moment you played at that gala, it was ours." Lily appeared on stage, climbing up before anyone could stop her. She wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a small circle of 3 people who'd learned that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about music and choosing each other and showing up even when you were scared. Behind them, Malcolm Reed stood with his daughter and granddaughter. He was crying too, the mask finally abandoned completely. He caught Jamie's eye across the chaos and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that cost him more than anyone would ever know, but which opened a door that had been locked for decades. 1 year later, the listening room had expanded to 5 locations across the city. The original chapel still served as headquarters, but now there were satellites in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island. 200 students, ages 6 to 78, each carrying their own story of things unsaid and wounds half-healed. Jamie stood in the chapel on a Sunday afternoon watching Lily, now 11 years old, teach a group of younger children basic music theory. She'd inherited her father's prescience and her mother's insight, and the combination made her a teacher despite her age. Kate had officially adopted her 3 months ago, a legal proceeding that changed nothing about their relationship, but everything about what it signified. The paperwork had arrived on a Tuesday. Kate had presented it over breakfast with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for first dates. "I know I'm not trying to replace Sarah. I know I can't be her mother. But if it's okay, I'd like to be something. Legally, something." Lily had looked at the papers, then at Kate, then at Jamie. Then she'd simply said, "You've been my something for a year already. The papers just make everyone else notice." Frank ran veteran workshops twice a week now, his trembling hands a badge of honor rather than shame. Elena had been hired as assistant director, managing 3 of the satellite locations while pursuing her bachelor's degree. Marcus Chen's first album had dropped in September to critical acclaim, and he dedicated it to the janitor who reminded him that different minds hear different music. Malcolm Reed volunteered every Tuesday evening, teaching a beginner class with the humility of someone who'd spent decades tearing things down and was now learning to build. He and Sophia had dinner every Sunday, slowly rebuilding trust through the patient accumulation of small gestures. Aisha lived with them both now, Sophia having completed the foster-to-adopt process with Malcolm's financial and emotional support. The girl spoke English fluently and had started composing pieces that graduate students studied for their emotional complexity. Kate split her time between administrative work and teaching, having discovered that she preferred the immediate impact of classroom instruction to the abstract satisfaction of board meetings. She still served on the Sterling Foundation board, but from a distance that allowed her to focus on what mattered. Jamie found her in the office late one evening, surrounded by grant applications and budget spreadsheets. She looked up when he entered, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "Lily's asleep. I told her she could finish the drawing tomorrow." "She wanted to finish tonight." "I know, but even artists need rest." Kate smiled, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. Speaking of rest, Jamie pulled her to her feet, ignoring her protests about unfinished work. They walked through the empty chapel toward the piano that had started everything. He sat and she settled beside him, their bodies fitting together with the ease of practice. "Play something." "What do you want to hear?" "Anything that's yours." Jamie placed his hands on the keys and began improvising, letting the melody emerge without planning or structure. It spoke of the past year, of growth and struggle, and the strange grace of second chances. Kate joined in after a few measures, her harmonies finding spaces in his melody that he hadn't known were empty. They played until their fingers ached, until the music said everything they couldn't articulate with words. When they finally stopped, the silence felt full rather than empty. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate's voice was soft. "Giving up the CEO position?" "Every day." She turned to face him. "And I'd do it again tomorrow. Because that title never made me feel as alive as this does, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Her hand found his. "Easy things don't change you. Hard things force you to become someone capable of doing them." Jamie thought about Sarah's letters, about 9 years of hiding, about a 10-year-old girl who'd pushed him to cross the street. He thought about Malcolm Reed crying at a recital, and Frank Martinez playing piano with trembling hands, and Elena Rodriguez teaching her children that beauty was something they deserved. He thought about all the students who'd walked through the door carrying weight and left carrying music instead. "You know what Sarah wrote in her last letter?" Kate shook her head. She said that love isn't about holding on, it's about letting go. Trusting that what you had was real and what comes next can be real too. His voice caught. "I didn't understand it then. Thought she was telling me to forget her. And now I know she was telling me to live. To keep playing until my hands give out, or my heart gives out, or there's nothing left but the music and the memory of what we had together." Kate leaned her head against his shoulder. "She would have liked me, I think. She would have loved you. Because you did what she asked me to do. You reminded me why music matters." They sat at the piano in the empty chapel, two people who'd been broken and were learning to be whole again. Through the windows, the city hummed its endless symphony, car horns and Koreans and voices calling across distances. Above them, stars struggled through light pollution, distant and persistent. Lily appeared in the doorway, her hair tangled from sleep, her sketchbook under her arm. "I heard music. Couldn't sleep. Had a dream about Mom." She crossed to them, climbing onto the bench between them. "She was listening to you play. Said she was proud." Jamie wrapped his arm around his daughter, feeling Kate do the same from the other side. "We all miss her." "I know, but I think she's happy we found Kate." Lily looked up at both of them with the unnerving wisdom that had been hers since birth. Because the best way to honor people who died is to keep living the way they wanted us to. Kate's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers. Not just you two, Mom too. Even though I never met her, she's been teaching me through Dad this whole time." They sat together at the piano, father-daughter, partner, as the city moved around them and music waited in the keys for hands brave enough to wake it. Jamie pulled out the worn leather notebook, its pages filled with half-finished compositions and Sarah's favorite songs and the lullaby that had taken a decade to complete. He opened to a blank page and began writing. A new piece, still taking shape, not quite formed but present in potential. He didn't know where it would go or what it would become, but he knew he'd finish it. Because that's what survivors do. They take the broken pieces and they make something new. Something that honors the past while reaching for the future. Kate watched him write, her hand resting on his shoulder. Lily leaned against them both, her sketchbook open to a new drawing of the three of them at the piano, musical notes floating upward like seeds carried on wind. The listening room exists because people forgot that music is medicine, not entertainment. Because we built walls between ourselves and beauty and convinced ourselves that art was for other people, people with credentials and training and the right kind of background. But beauty doesn't check credentials. It just shows up in hands willing to create it and hearts brave enough to receive it. Jamie looked at the women beside him, one who'd given him life twice, once at birth and once at 10 when she'd found her mother's letters, and one who'd given him a second chance to be seen. He thought about Malcolm Reed teaching beginners and Frank Martinez helping veterans and Elena Rodriguez showing her children that they deserved anything they could dream. He thought about Dorothy Williams, who'd played Gershwin perfectly even as she forgot her own name, proving that music lives in a part of the brain that transcends damage and disease and the slow erosion of self. He thought about Aisha playing Syria with 7-year-old hands and Marcus Chen composing Revolutions and the 200 students who'd learned that their voices mattered even when the world said otherwise. The music never died. Jamie understood that now. It was just waiting for him to come home, waiting for Kate to remember she deserved to play, waiting for Lily to be born and grow into someone who could see what adults were too broken to recognize, waiting for Malcolm to understand that tearing things down was easier than building them, but infinitely less satisfying, waiting for every student who'd walk through the door carrying weight and leave carrying melody instead. They stayed at the piano until dawn crept through the chapel windows, playing and talking and existing in the space between what was and what would be. When Lily finally fell asleep against Kate's shoulder, they carried her to the small office couch and covered her with Jamie's jacket. What happens now? Jamie looked around the chapel, at the piano that had started everything, at the walls that had absorbed a year of music and tears and transformations too subtle to measure, but too significant to ignore. Now we keep going. More students, more locations, more people who need reminding that they deserve to be heard. And us? Kate's question hung in the air, weighted with everything they'd built and everything they risked by continuing. Jamie pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her against him, evidence that second chances were real and grief didn't have to be the end. Us? We love each other and we fight when we need to and we keep showing up even when we're scared. We teach Lily that loss is part of life, but so is joy. We honor Sarah by living the way she wanted us to, openly, bravely, with our hands on the keys and our hearts wide open. Kate's lips curved into a smile. That sounds like a plan. It's not a plan. It's a promise. They locked the chapel behind them and walked out into the city's morning chaos. Three people who'd learned that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. That music was medicine for wounds no surgeon could reach. That the best revenge against grief was living so fully that the dead could hear you celebrating from whatever distance separated life from whatever came after. Sarah was listening. Jamie knew it the way he knew the Steinway's action, or the weight of middle C, or the fact that Lily's birthday was March 13th and Kate took her coffee black, and Malcolm Reed was learning to play Chopin with humility instead of precision. Some truths didn't require evidence. They just required faith. And James Cooper, formerly invisible janitor, now teacher and father and partner, and man who'd learned that crossing the street was terrifying and necessary and the only way forward, had finally learned to have faith in things he couldn't see but could hear in the silence between notes, in the space where music waited for hands brave enough to wake it, in the promise that endings were also beginnings if you were strong enough to keep playing.